Hello, everyone. My name's Vanessa, and I am one of the lead programming instructors here at AIM Institute. And I am just here to sort of hang out and make sure there's no technical difficulties. And if there is, be of assistance in any way. But Aaron is going to go ahead and start his presentation. So if you need me for anything, just let me know in the chat. If not, Aaron, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Vanessa. Hopefully everything goes smooth this time.
Yes, hopefully.
That's good.
All right, thanks, Aaron.
Yep, thank you. So the topic for my talk this year is ethical AI, be mindful of our algorithms. Ethical AI, that's what is ethical AI? It's a very tough question to answer. We're not going to go too deep into trying to define it. We just have an innate sense of ethics, and we're going to kind of go on that as being our basis. I always have to put a quote from a movie in almost every talk I do. I like the one from Blade Runner for this case. Replicants are like any, are either a benefit or a hazard. If they're a benefit, it's not my problem. And that's something we're keeping in mind with AI. AI is existing so many places now, we're not even aware of it. So easy to do nowadays and stuff like that. It's just amazing how it's being laid out. One of the big issues we have with AI is we can't predict when we'll have a leap or a bound. For a long time, it was assumed it would be 2040 or 2050 before a program would be able to be the Go master. It happened instead in 2016, like 30 years earlier than we expected it. Go, if you've never played it, is a board game. It's on a 19 by 19 grid. It's kind of like, it's referred to by some people as the Chinese version of chess and stuff like that. It's a very interesting game, and I am very, very, very bad at it. So keep that in mind as well. But the fact that they were able to come up, the idea was it would take till 2040 or 2054 we'd have enough CPU capacity to be able to actually do that analysis. But they did a different sort of sets of algorithms. They were able to reach it much, much faster than we expected to. It was just fascinating how quickly they were able to do it. A disclaimer. We're going to be talking about some potentially thorny issues today. The goal here is to raise awareness. We're not saying this is right or that is right. It's just to be more mindful, to be thinking more about it. To pause and hopefully make better decisions. AI and ML systems are not inherently anything. They are just used to amplify our information, our abilities. And I will use the terms AI and ML, and ML being machine learning, a lot, almost interchangeably in this talk, because AI by itself, without machine learning, is not considered to be quite as dangerous right now, but it's getting there. I've been programming for over 30 years in the field, and I'm still figuring this out as well. We all are. It's a brand new frontier in a lot of ways. I got started doing research into AI ML a couple years ago when I was trying to figure out how to find a better way to do anomaly detection for logs. I still think there's something to be done with, you're getting so much information nowadays from sites like Splunk, your host intrusion detection systems, all this information. How do you make sense of it? How do you prioritize it? How do you figure out when something bad is happening? How do you figure out what a regular running system is like? And there's tremendous potential for a system being able to do analysis for that, to try and grade stuff where you go like, hey, this looks interesting. There's someone from this IP address trying to hack your system, that kind of information. And that's how I got into it. I bought some books. I've bought a bunch of Udemy courses. I've read a lot about it on the web, but I'm still figuring out like everyone else is. I also did get my Azure AI Fundamentals cert, so I've got that little badge that I can point to people when they ask the question, do you know anything about AI? I'm like, the fundamentals. So this will be the overview of the talk. We're going to go through some bad AI ML examples. We'll talk about ethical AI guidelines. We'll talk about some of the common elements of ethical AI. We'll talk about what you can do as an individual to try and help your company, your people, your group, whatever, do a better job with AI and how to better use it. And the last thing, which is the reason why you should hang on till the end of the talk, is because I'll talk about how you can get AI certified for free. Some bad AI ML examples. We'll take a look at 4 bad AI ML examples. Genderify, Amazon's hiring tool, Microsoft Tay, and a new one I just added today called Limited Insurance, which I was just reading about this morning. It's a gift. Let's put that way, if you want some bad AI ML examples. Genderify. Genderify was a service using AI to determine gender based on names. What could go wrong with this? It sounds so easy to do. Here's some examples of what can go wrong with it. If you use Megan Smith, it came back with an assessment of 39.6% male, 60% female. Probably a woman's name. If you use Dr. Megan Smith, it comes back with 75.9% male, 24% male. That's not good. That's wrong. And an example being, if you use something like Mrs. Jones Smith, it came back with 94% male. That, quite simply, is what can go wrong. Genderify was a real service by a real company with an API, documentation, pricing, etc. They were still pretty new in the game. They were offering their 30-day trials and stuff like that, and a certain number of lookups and all that kind of stuff. It was released on producthunt.com, which is the Y Combinator type of company for new products. How did it go wrong? There's not enough information on that, but obviously there was not enough testing. Could it be bad training, bad data, bad modeling, or D, all of the above? We don't know. I would really appreciate if the Genderify guys would actually release more information about how their system works, but very few people really like to advertise their failures, which I don't like to as well, so I understand their approach. But it would be interesting as a case study to see how more depth can be done. I might come back to this a little bit, depending on how we have time, just to see how we could apply the ethical AI guidelines to this as an example. But given how perfect Lemonade is, I might actually use that one instead. Another one, Amazon's hiring tool. Amazon 2014 decided they need to create a new process to help automate the company's headhunting process. Think about how many people you know have applied at Amazon to work there as a developer, a database admin, whatever role. The idea is you'd be able to give a system 100 or 1,000 resumes, and it would give you the top 5 or the top 10 or the top whatever. You would then pursue those potential applicants. You'd be getting the people you consider to be best, which is always what you want for your company. After analysis in 2015, it was discovered that the system was giving a preference to male applicants. Successful resumes were considered male resumes largely because of past male bias in hiring. References to female topics such as women's chess club and any other reference to something with the phrase women in it were downgraded. That was just the way the scoring system works. Preferences given to macho verbs such as captured, dominate, and others. Amazon shuttered the effort in 2017, but they had largely quit using the system before that because they figured out it was bad in 2015. What this brings up is that you can be coding bias into your systems without awareness and automating them to systems that might not even be challenged. Because it's one thing when I say, I don't like this or I don't like that, but it's another thing when the machine says that. And you say, we've trained this machine with umpteen thousand lines of code, or we've given this many test cases, or we've done this, or we've done that. It gives a legitimacy which some people will not challenge. And one of the most important things that I hope everyone gets out of this talk is challenge how an AI system got its results, because that is always something that should be looked at. One of the questions is, how do you grade an applicant if you're looking for a simple number to include diversity, whether the applicant is suitable, and so on? This leads to another one of my favorite things, references to The Prisoner. If you're very old or very, very old like myself, you've watched The Prisoner many, many years ago. If you haven't, you should watch it. But the main concept is the gentleman's not a number. And you can't identify someone just by giving them one score. But Amazon's hiring tool is very interesting. There's a couple references to it. I recommend looking into it. What makes this interesting is Amazon is big. They don't screw around when they're doing this kind of stuff. They had whole teams working. This wasn't one guy, an intern working on this on the weekends. This was a whole group of people working on analysis, feedback. They were trying to figure it out. They were doing testing, doing all this kind of stuff, and they missed the ball. And that gives you an idea how easy it can be to do that situation. Microsoft Tay. I actually kind of enjoyed this one until the end. Microsoft created an AI chatbot named Tay that was designed to help develop conversational understanding with humans. It was supposed to be an improved bot. Tay was supposed to be a fun chatbot on Twitter. You could tweet to, and you could read it, and it would imitate language and pick up stuff over time and get better at conversations. Within 24 hours, Tay went from quote unquote, can I just say that I'm stoked to meet you? Humans are super cool. To Hitler was right, I hate the Jews. Less than 24 hours to go from one to the other. This was an intentional effort by people on the internet to get the system to say hateful things. But it's still amazing how far it went from one to the other in that short period of time. The internet community, what they discovered was there is a debugging phrase, repeat after me, you could say, that would add new response to the system. Microsoft deleted the account and all of its tweets. Obviously, they were horrified by what they saw as well. But there was some core concepts of it that were kind of interesting, because you think about it, think about the next time you have a conversation with a chatbot, what percentage of the information you put in there gets fed back into the system? Whenever you say something like, I bought a Dell computer or an X computer, and I'm having this problem with it, have you tried this, this, or this? If you're putting information into it, is it getting added to the conversational database? Is that stuff propagating? And if you had enough people say something horrible about power supplies for a new Lenovo, would that system make it into the database? Would it come down to a situation where it's like, my machine isn't working, have you tried killing your neighbors? Something like that, some horrible thing like that. It's just amazing how old the feedback loop goes, how there's always a quest for more information and more data. This one's the one I added today, limited insurance. It is magnificent. Lemonade Insurance has decided to retract claims about how they're using AI to study videos that customers were uploading to see if they could tell they were fraudulent. The way it kind of works is they have a chat bot, I think it's called Al. I could be off on that. When you file a claim, you upload a video, you provide information about explaining the issue, like a tree hit my house, knocked part of my roof off, and hit my gazebo or something. The system will then do an analysis of it. It decides whether or not to pay the claim in minutes. If it decides to reject the claim, it can, obviously there's an appeal process and all that kind of stuff. But what they said in their system was on Twitter was, our AI carefully analyzes videos for signs of fraud. It can pick up nonverbal cues that traditional insurers can't, since they don't use the digital claims process. The idea being they can try and figure out, like, hey, I don't think your gazebo was actually hit. I think everything's fine. I'm going to reject your claim and force you to go through additional layers of work and stuff like that to be able to figure it out. But keep in mind, if you're in something like a car accident or something, when you submit your thing, you very well could be agitated. You could be concerned about what happened to someone that was in the car with you, what happened to you, what happened to your property, what happened to someone else. All this kind of information factored into it. How does it figure this out? They got some very, very intense feedback. I recommend you take a look at their Twitter feed. It is can be kind of rough. They released an updated statement saying that they only use facial recognition. That's to make sure the same person wasn't filing multiple claims. One thing it did also admit, the company does say it collects physical characteristics when handling life insurance. Keep that in mind. If you're all of a sudden thinking, well, I'm uploading a video of myself for life insurance purposes, and I make various statements and stuff like that, it can put that information into a system. It can determine a whole lot from that stuff. There's a whole lot of information available to them. They did release a statement. Our systems don't evaluate claims based on background, gender, appearance, skin tone, disability, or any physical characteristics, nor do we evaluate any of these by proxy. An example being, if you're taking a video of yourself for life insurance purposes and you're differently abled, is that going to flip a flag? Are they going to, without them even being aware of it, is it going to be something that gets put into a different bucket? That is something to be concerned about. Why is it bad? I'd like to keep this example in mind as we work through some of the ethical AI statements. One question is this really a company using AI to do stuff? Or is this one trying to use AI in marketing to differentiate itself from something else? It's a relatively small company. It's a relatively new company. But are they just using this to try and sell themselves better, to make themselves sound more advanced? Or is this a case where there's some nefarious thing that we're not even aware of, and they're not even aware of, that may turn up later on? They're rejecting certain classes of people from insurance for some reason that the algorithm doesn't like, because they didn't put the right data set into it. Very, very concerning stuff. So that was just a few bad examples. There are a lot more examples that are made public. And I recommend you do a search in newsgoogle.com and look for bad AI, bad ML, and you will find a lot of them. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. How many private ones are out there making decisions that we're not even aware of? AI is being used in things like mortgages, salary offers, employment, resume hiring analysis, adoption, medical care, new product development, and so on. A personal example of this is I had a friend run my resume through their company's AI system. And one thing I didn't take into account is my resume had 2 columns in it with information on this one and this one. Well, the AI system wasn't smart enough to understand that, so it just read across. All of a sudden, you're into Aaron Grothe attended college, did this, and it went to my work experience. And it just got a gobbledygook, and I was getting scored very, very low on that. Fortunately, I had a friend at the company who was actually able to say, hey, you're getting a score that is just insane. It's saying that you're bad, real bad. And fortunately, he was able to provide me that feedback, and I, working with him, managed to actually go back through and reformat my resume to make it very simple, just blocks of text, no columns, any of that stuff. And I was able to get a respectable score. I still didn't get the job, but at least I got to the point where I was being considered for the job. So keep that stuff in mind, because it's something that affected my life, and I had no awareness of it. If I had not had that connection at that company, I wouldn't know about it. And the AI system they use for resume analysis is a standard one used by a lot of companies. So keep that in mind when you're doing your resumes. They're probably going to get AI'd. They're probably going to get some analysis, some score based upon that on it. And before you even get to the point where you even get considered, because the Amazon hiring tool is gone, but variations of it still exist and are still being used and are being offered as services by other companies. Just think about how much time they spend looking to hire the right people. It can do a whole lot for you very quickly, but it can also really, really hurt you if you're not thinking about that kind of stuff. So please keep that in mind. Ethical AI guidelines. With the bad examples, let's take a look at some examples of some ethical AI guidelines that some companies, groups have released. We'll be using the following for examples: Microsoft, Google, and FTC. Some cloud companies don't have official AI statements. Most do, and I suggest you consult with any vendor whose AI services you use. Microsoft has this, wonderful set of cognitive services for doing all sorts of stuff: image classification, boundary analysis, interpolation, extrapolation, sentiment analysis, text-to-speech, speech-to-text, translation. And they have it all under this guideline, under this one set of services called the cognitive services. So keep that in mind. And they try and say that they comply with their guidelines throughout. But let's take a look at Microsoft's. They have 6 rules. I consider these to be a very good base. They look to be pretty complete. There's a reference to them. The 6 rules are fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability. Fairness. AI systems should treat all people fairly. AI systems can behave unfairly because of societal basis reflected in data sets. AI systems can behave unfairly because of societal basis explicitly or implicitly reflected in decisions made by the team during AI development and deployment lifecycle. They have a checklist, which I highly recommend you take a look at. It has a lot of great information in there. Potential example of bias in training data. If you're to go back 30 years in terms of mortgage applications, approvals, acceptance rates, defaults, all that stuff, and correlate that into modern day times, you might be encoding a implicit bias that exists in load applications in the past. And it's very easy to do. The data is available. It might be the easiest data to get. How do you determine to make the data more fair when you're in the process of it? So without being aware of it, you may be reinforcing a bias based upon your data set or how you process them. Microsoft has a tool called FairLearn that is open source to help de-bias systems. It's out of GitHub. I highly recommend taking a look at it. It has some very cool stuff in there. So that's fairness. Reliability and safety. AI systems should perform reliably and safety. A system needs to perform as originally designed to be able to safely respond to new situations. AI systems can degrade over time. Robust monitoring tracking process need to be created to measure the model's performance over time, evaluate what is necessary to retrain, update training, or create new models. Self-driving cars, a prime example of that. An example of this can be systems that have been provided data sets that don't reflect enough cases. An example being, you have a SCADA system that's being used for controlling batteries and power storage for a solar energy generation system. If you don't take into account the battery's life cycle, their time, their decrease capacity over time. You could be overcharging the batteries, and you could theoretically providing a safety risk through a fire or whatever else, just because you haven't considered the whole life cycle of the infrastructure that you're trying to work with. That's one thing a lot of people don't think about with AI solutions. They're going to need to be evaluated over time. They're going to need to be modified over time. There's going to be changes. I mean, if you're doing mortgages today, you're not going to set it all in stone today. You're going to have to take into account what is the mortgage approval rejection rates in the future, and so on and so forth. So there's always going to be a feedback loop there. There's going to be a whole life cycle, and that's going to definitely something you have to take into account. Privacy and security. AI systems should be secure, respect privacy. AI systems should try and do as much locally as they can. Example being, if you're doing stuff if you're using AI to do analysis of data on someone's phone, you should do as much as possible on the phone, then upload the results to the AI system to actually do additional analysis. You shouldn't be just taking everyone's speech, uploading it to the AI system, then doing the work, doing the analysis. Example being, Alexa should not be listening to you 24/7 from Amazon. It should be listening to you locally for the wake word, then start doing the processing. AI systems by default have no concept of privacy. Data leakage can be an issue. There's also a great deal of issues that can happen in terms of aggregation, because you're pulling so much information together. How complete a profile are you building for someone? So keep that in mind. Microsoft has open sourced another tool called Counterfeit, which is also GitHub. It generates adversarial models, which can be used for testing this. It's some cool stuff. They've released a lot of great tools and information on that. Inclusiveness. AI systems should empower everyone and engage people. Does your AI system take into account people with different physical capabilities, people with reduced vision, differently abled, and so on? Are your data sets diverse enough? Is your training model broad enough? How are you measuring success and failure in training? That's a very, very difficult thing. During early periods of training of AI system development in certain countries, like example being Japan was doing it, they were having some very good systems with facial recognition, detecting stuff, AI bots and stuff like that. And then they had people who were had blonde hair, and they wasn't able to recognize because they had never taken that into account in the process, because they had a very small subset of that. So there's a whole lot of stuff you have to take into account. So make sure to keep that in mind. This is one of Microsoft's statements on inclusiveness. It is designed for the 3% to include the other 97%. Does your facial recognition include a wide enough set of people for analysis? Does your speech to text handle accented speech, generated voices, speech impediments? There's a lot of stuff in there to deal with. This can be a very tough thing for a small company to do when building their training models. That's one of the reasons why using services from companies like Oracle, Amazon, Microsoft, and so on and so forth, and Google can be helpful, because they have access to a wider data set. They can do a much better job modeling voices in some respects than a small mom and pop shop obviously can. Transparency. AI systems should be understandable. When an AI system makes a decision, it should be possible to understand how the system reaches conclusion. If an AI system decides on a certain set of medical decisions for a patient, how wide it reaches those decisions should be transparent to their doctor and to the patient. Given the size of the training data sets, this can be a challenge. When a self-driving car causes an accident, and it's going to happen, obviously, we're getting more and more into that area, that phase, and it's going to be once a self-driving car causes an accident with potentially the loss of life, there's going to have to be a way to figure out why the car made the decision it did. Why did it hit the lamppost? Why did it drive off the road? Why did it hit this other component? Was it a lack of bad data? Was it a lack of training? What happened? What do we have to do to make sure that doesn't happen again? There's a whole lot of stuff in there that's going to happen there. Example being was my AI analysis for my resume. I would like to know why it did that analysis. I was able to figure out, reverse engineer how I got my score, but I wasn't able to go like, why are you giving me a bad score? I just had to figure that out and try a couple things to get the right answer. Accountability. People should be accountable for AI systems. Once again, self-driving cars are a great example here. There is an accident, who's responsible? The driver, the company who made the car, and so on and so forth. That is going to go through the courts, and it's going to be very interesting. Keep in mind, when you buy these cars, that kind of stuff in the AI systems, There's going to be disclaimers. There's going to be a whole bunch of stuff saying this doesn't apply, but there's going to be a whole bunch of back and forth on that. It'll be figured out through the courts, insurance companies, law standards, so on. Yeah, I had to throw this one there. The ability to do things like gait analysis, facial recognition, license plate tracking, so on. You can build a heck of a police state. I'll refer to that at the end as well. So that is Microsoft's 6 principles. Provides a pretty good overview of some of the ethical AI issues to be mindful of. But it's just a very simple thing. I mean, fairness, inclusiveness, transparency, reliability, and safety, accountability. And the one I'm missing, which I'll leave as an exercise to you guys, gives you an idea. I think that's a pretty good coverage of it. It gives you a pretty good approach towards it, but it's not the only one, of course. Google's objectives for AI applications, they have 7 rules. There's a lot of overlap, of course, principles, safety, accountability, fairness, and so on. Here's their 7. Be socially beneficial. Avoid creating or reinforcing unfair bias. Be built and tested for safety. Be accountable to people. Incorporate privacy design principles, uphold high standards of scientific excellence, be made available for uses at a core with these principles. It's a little more developer speak, but I think it's a pretty good overall set. Oh, I have to put this in there. Google's AI group is under a lot of turmoil right now. There's people resigning, getting fired, so on and so forth. If you do a search in Google, funnily enough, for Google AI resignation, you'll get a lot of results. They're having some changes. There's a whole bunch of fight back and forth about it. Keep in mind, Google is a multinational corporation. They have dealings in places that are considered to be more less free than America. Let's put it that way. They have dealings with China, Saudi Arabia, all sorts of places. And so there's a whole bunch of pushback and forth on that, and what of these standards apply across the world for a company that's a multinational. So that covers 2 companies' approach. Let's see what the government has to say. In this case, we're going to use the Federal Trade Commission. Aiming for truth, fairness, and equity in your company's use of AI. They had 7 guidelines. Once again, a lot of overlap with Microsoft and Google's ethics, safety, accountability, fairness. Here's a reference to it. It's from their blog, but it's really good reading. And we're going to go into a little detail on that. Start with the right foundation. Watch out for discriminatory outcomes. Embrace transparency, independence. Number 4, I really like because it applies directly back to the Lemonade guys. Don't exaggerate what your algorithm can do or whether it can deliver fair, unbiased results. Number 5, tell the truth about how you use data. That is a tremendously important one. Number 6, do more harm than good. Number 7, hold yourself accountable or be ready for the FTC to do it for you. That's actually in the actual item. I had to include that one, include the whole line in that, because initially I had to just hold yourself accountable, but I had to put the whole thing in there. But that gives you an idea of what their guidelines are, what they're concerned about. They're seeing the core of this. So many companies are buying AI services, using them, and so on and so forth. They may not be developing, they may be putting together a little bit from this company, company A, company B, company C, and creating some sort of entity that they don't even know much about. But here's a little more information on some of the areas that the FTC is getting involved in. Section 5 of the FTC Act. The FTC Act prohibits unfair or deceptive practices that include the sale or use of, for example, racially biased algorithms. An example being Cloudflare just recently made a decision to no longer block LGBTQ sites, offering that as an option in their service. They were offering it in the past, but they have decided not to after a storm. Let's put it that way. Another word in front of it. So that's a situation where things are getting better. Fair Credit Reporting Act. The FCRA comes into play in certain circumstances where the algorithm is used to deny people employment, housing, credit, insurance, or other benefits. So that is interesting, but you also have to get back to the point where you have to have enough people that have been discriminated against, for lack of a better term, and actually be able to put that together to actually try and get to like a class action type situation if you're going after a company for that kind of stuff. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act, this one has been around for years and is very important. The ECOA makes it illegal for a company to use a biased algorithm that results in credit discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, natural origin, sex, marital status, age, or because a person serves public assistance. So that is a whole lot of stuff there. There are also a lot of other laws, regulations that are currently in effect that will have an impact on the use of AI. It will factor into it. But keep in mind, some of these companies aren't aware of it and will only run into it at some later date. So it's better to keep in mind that the 6 principles and Microsoft 6 principles, the 7 principles from Google and the FTCs to try and help guide you. It kind of provides a moral place to go, for lack of a better term, to help you try and figure out what is a better path. So that's just 3 examples. Many other companies are drafting or released their AI guidelines. I actually reached out to Oracle and AWS and tried to get answers from both them on them, and I did not hear back. But I think Microsoft's guidelines do a great job covering most of the bases. If you comply with that, I think you can say you can pretty much sleep at night and say you're doing a good job with in terms of dealing with AI. What can you do? Be aware of potential issues with AI. Do play the devil's advocate occasionally. Consider the life cycle of an AI system. Ask questions. Help raise awareness. Consider tools like Counterfeit for creating better test cases. Consider using cloud tools that some vendors have already built that can do the kind of stuff. For example, if I was doing facial recognition, I would probably look into using Microsoft's cognitive services because they have a much wider data set than what I will ever be able to put together, or some other companies. It's not even, if it's not Microsoft, somebody else. But just keep in mind that there are people doing this stuff that are professionals that have been putting time and effort into it. But those companies should also be able to answer how they comply with those components, how they handle data privacy, how they do this, who owns the data. All that kind of stuff has to be dealt with in that situation. And don't be afraid to ask a question of an AI vendor. How do you deal with to make sure that your systems aren't biased? How wide is your training? How do you handle this? How far back does this part go or that part go? It's just a whole process of a conversation to keep that stuff going, keep it aware. What else can you do? There are nonprofit groups that work at making sure that everybody is representing AI. Consider joining, supporting one of them. There's WINLP, Widening Natural Language Processing. They are working at making sure that women and other underrepresented groups in AI are getting represented. They do some good stuff. They do a conference, I think, twice a year. They have some really good information on there. I highly recommend hitting their website. There's a site for Queer in AI, which is for people from different orientations. And they have, I actually missed the last one on that. There's also Black in AI, which is for making sure that all communities and races and so on and so forth are accounted for in AI, are represented. And all 3 are great groups. There are a lot of other groups as well. Whatever your component is, there are groups that are doing stuff in terms of things like making sure that people with speech impediments are supported in AI, that they are included. It's just part of the process. If we're going to use AI on everybody, we need to make sure it includes everybody. It has to be aware of it, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because we want the right results. And if we don't do that, we're going to be off, and that's going to be very, very bad. So, first off, thank you for staying this long. I greatly appreciate it. As promised, up next is the AI certification trick I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. I currently hold the following certification from Microsoft, just the Azure AI Fundamentals. If you go out to their site, it's normally $100 to get the certification. And I'll tell you let's go over how to do it for free. Microsoft is still holding virtual training days. Excuse me. If you hit that link, there will be options to sign up for various classes. And one of them will say, sign up for a virtual Microsoft Azure virtual training day, AI Fundamentals. It is a 1-day course and it lasts about 4 hours. It's actually a really good thing. It's more along the lines of an introduction to their catalog of what some of their tools are and stuff like that. But it's a very good introduction to a little bit of AI, and I highly recommend it, regardless of whether or not you want to get the certification. But after you attend the training, you'll get a voucher to sit for the AI 900 exam for free. They don't go into ethics a great deal, and they didn't, at least in the test I took, and they talk a little bit about it during the process. Mostly a couple references and shout outs to the other sites that we talked about earlier from Microsoft. but it's some very good stuff. So that's enough to get you to the point where you've attended the class, you get the voucher. So just attending the class won't be enough to prepare you to take the exam. Microsoft has free online training for this as well. There's an example link to it. And they have it actually for all their courses, so it's actually kind of nice. If you do that, you hit John Seville has a guide on AI 900 on YouTube. It's really, really good, and it should help you out. I also hit a little bit of exam topics because it has some examples how the questions are worded and stuff, which I found to be very useful because I had not taken certification in a while. So it gave me an idea how the knot, the double knots, how the ABCs are laid out. I highly recommend that as well. I just sat for the exam. It took me about 40 minutes. I got a 910, so you need 700 pass, so I did all right on that. So one thing to keep in mind, since we're running a little short, is training days. It has 4 different fundamentals classes. There's AI fundamentals, there's data fundamentals, there's Azure fundamentals, and there's Power Logic fundamentals. And all 4 of those will get you a voucher for a fundamentals exam. So if you want to try and get your resume to look better, I'd recommend the Azure AI, obviously, the Azure one, the Azure AI one, the Azure Data Fundamentals one, and the Power Logic is just actually kind of interesting. I did not know a lot about their product beforehand. So that's, if you do that, that's for the $100 vouchers you get to use for that. Highly recommend it. So we're currently in a really turbulent time in AI. We're figuring out what is and shouldn't be allowed. What are the rules? What are the guidelines? And keep in mind, we are so far ahead over our skis in some areas in this that it is hard to believe. Microsoft's president of said, actually, I got to read this from the site, another site. Excuse me for a second. Microsoft President Orwell's 1984 may come to pass in 2024 without AI protections. And that's from Brad Smith, who's actually a pretty smart guy. There's a whole lot of stuff with AI that's happening. It's really taken off. It's a real growth area. A lot of people are getting involved in it. And the services and stuff like that, it's not to the point where anymore you have to understand how a neural net works. All you have to do now is consume the right service, know how to use the API for it, and you can do a lot of stuff with it without having any awareness how it happens. But I included the link to the Microsoft Brad Smith thing in the chat window. It's definitely worth a tremendous read, and it's just back at the whole question, like, what are we going to do here? What are we going to do in these components? Keep in mind, this is also a worldwide issue. The rules that we would apply here in the U.S. may not apply to other places. There are going to be places that don't consider that to be as big an issue and stuff like that. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's going to come down. Yeah, this has tremendous promise. And if we screw this up, we're going to seriously regret it. I'm not talking Skynet. I'm just talking a point where we have algorithms that provide information and we have no idea how it got there, why it's doing X, why it's doing Y, and we just kind of have to coexist with these algorithms that we don't understand. So, and there's results we don't understand, and we're going to have some capability to get back to. And keep in mind, AI is going to get more and more integrated into everything we do. When we have self-driving cars, it's going to be a question of how do you figure out what decisions are made, who made them, why they were made, that kind of stuff. It's just, summary is quite simply, ask questions about AI. Don't trust it because it's coming from a machine, because it's something from this, because it's automated, because it's a huge data set. Ask questions is the most important thing about AI over time. And I hope everyone takes that into account. And that's all I got. I'll pop back over the window to see if there's any questions. Okay. Or there are no questions. Okay. All right. Well, that's all I had. Oh, actually, what's my next talk about? I'll be talking at OLUG in July about Pine phones, which is going to be kind of interesting. It's the attempt to make a Linux phone. So I think we got, look forward to Q&A. What are your thoughts? Oh, there is a question. What are your thoughts on recent bans of facial recognition technology in U.S. cities? Are there any uses of AI ML that you think should be banned altogether instead of made more ethical? Man, that's a tough one. One one of the problems with this ad is to do with, regardless whatever happens with banning governments from doing things, keep in mind the U.S. government has strict rules on what they can do in terms of collecting data. There are no rules what they can do in terms of buying data. Whatever commercial service makes data available, the U.S. government, the localities and stuff like that are allowed to buy it. So there's going to be it's going to be very hard to outlaw that type of stuff. There's John Oliver on Last Week Tonight about a couple months ago did a whole thing about facial recognition. There's some companies that are just scanning Facebook, YouTube, and so on and so forth, and actually just using the tags to determine it. I would like to say there's something we could do with it, but I think it's going to be almost impossible to stop. So the best we can do is try and make sure that people understand there's consequences for doing it wrong. I know that's a pretty Weasley answer, but that's what I got. Sorry. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, well, I hope everyone else enjoys Infotec. It's been great so far. Looking forward to the next couple. So thanks. Vanessa? Oh.
Just get ready to head on. Thank you. Presentation. I really enjoyed it. A lot of new stuff that I learned. So I'm excited to see your presentation next year. And you guys, if anybody in the chat is still there, go ahead and head out to the next section, the next sessions that will be coming up at 3:15. Awesome.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks, Aaron. See you later. Bye.